I'm guilty of forgetting. So perfect. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. This is just the introduction part. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Take Action for Birds and Wildlife. We're so glad you're here. My name is Katie Searing. I'm the office manager at Indian River Lakes Conservancy out of Redwood, New York. And joining me in this presentation will be Jeff Larkin, faculty at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and he is also an American Bird Conservancy's Forest Bird Habitat Advisor. We also have Spencer Bussler, Associate Director for the Thousand Islands Land Trust here in upstate New York, with a home base office in Clayton, New York. Claire Mann is joining us from the Forest Program. She's a Forest Program Senior Associate with Audubon, New York. Steve Deal with Indian River Lakes Conservancy, board member, and Tom Langdon, who will be speaking in the Q&A, is faculty at Clarkston University. This webinar is made possible through a grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, awarded to the American Bird Conservancy in partnership with Thousand Islands Land Trust, Indian River Lakes Conservancy, Audubon, Connecticut, and New York, and the Ruffed Grouse Society. Our speakers tonight will share on-the-ground experience, successful management strategies, and ways individuals and communities can take part in this important work. We hope you leave tonight feeling informed, inspired, and empowered to take action. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A, so please make sure to use the chat feature on the side. The webinar is being recorded for those who would like to rewatch and share. If you wish to stay in the loop after this webinar, please pop your email address in the chat or follow up with Claire afterwards. She will share her email towards the end. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us tonight. Claire, it's all you.
Thank you, Katie. I'm just going to pull up my presentation and then we'll get started. Okay, are we seeing that okay? Steve, you're still on camera. Give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, welcome everyone. As Katie mentioned, we're here today to talk to you about taking action in our forests for wildlife habitat. So I'll jump right into it. So today we'll talk a little bit about forest bird population trends and why there's a need for us to do the work that we do. We'll talk about forest age class diversity and habitat and what quality habitat for forest birds looks like. And then we'll walk through some examples of this management that's happened in the St. Lawrence Valley so you can see real life scenarios of how this all plays out. And then we'll wrap up today talking through some funding opportunities that are available to landowners, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. So to share a little bit of background, I share this graphic that comes from a study that was done a few years ago that really analyzed and looked at breeding bird population trends. You'll see that this starts at about 1970. That's when we started collecting kind of wide-scale data, so we don't have a lot of dependable information before that. But what this study did was just look at those populations over time, and what they found is that we've lost nearly 3 billion birds in the last about 55 years, which that's a huge number, right? But to put that into context, that's about a 29% net loss, which is a significant decline. That study then also broke it down and looked at different habitat types and the birds that use them. The image on the right shows groups that are experiencing some of the worst declines, and you can see that eastern forest birds are there. That's what we're going to really focus in on during our talk today. Eastern forest birds have experienced about a 17% population decline. The important thing to note there, though, is that that's an average, and a number of species are affected at a much higher rate. So the example given there is the wood thrush. We've lost about 60% of their population, so a huge decline in the last 55 years. I also like to share this image that comes from the most recent State of the Birds report. That's an annual report that comes out from a number of conservation partners that really looks at, again, what's going on with birds. So that report, on top of looking at the general population trends, also looked at forest birds in particular that rely on disturbance. So disturbance that creates more complexity within our forests, more canopy gaps, more diverse understories, and it really showed that those disturbance-dependent species are continuing to experience steep declines. So you can see New York in the image there, and the areas of red are showing a decrease in annual abundance. for those disturbance-dependent species, and we're seeing those declines across pretty much the entire state. This really highlights that there's a need to use active forest management to help mimic those disturbances and create more complex forests. So we'll talk about that a lot today, how to do that, what does that actually look like out on the ground or maybe out on your property. So, why are we seeing such declines in forest birds? The primary driver is a loss of the quantity and the quality of habitat on the breeding ground. Now, quantity of habitat, that's pretty straightforward, right? It's just a loss of forest overall, a loss of forest to land use conversion. Loss of quality is a little more nuanced and there's more factors at play. A lot of these are things that maybe you already are familiar with, but we have things like forest fragmentation. That's the breaking up of our forests into smaller parcels mixed in with different land use, whether it's residential or agricultural. And what this does is it creates more forest edge. And when there's more forest edge, birds experience higher rates of predation from things like raccoons, cats, skunks. And it also opens up birds to kind of unique scenarios, like brown-headed cowbird nest parasitism, which if you're not familiar, the brown-headed cowbird is a bird who lays its eggs in the nest of a host species. In the photo here, the example is the wood thrush. So once the brown-headed cowbird lays its eggs there, it just leaves them there and goes on about its life, which is a great strategy for the cowbird, but not so great for the wood thrush because now there's more competition in the nest and that lowers overall brood success. And this happens in those highly fragmented landscapes, especially where there's a lot of interaction with agricultural lands. We also have invasive and interfering vegetation. So this refers to our non-native invasive species, things like honeysuckle, Japanese barberry, buckthorn, stuff that outcompetes our more desirable natives. And we also have interfering vegetation, and that refers to native species that can become troublesome. For example, we have American beech that's been infected with beech bark disease, and when that happens, that dead or dying tree pushes up a bunch of root sprouts and creates these thickets of young beech saplings that really persist in the understory and midstory for a long time and outcompete more desirable and diverse regeneration that would actually grow into a big healthy tree, unlike beech anymore, unfortunately. Our deer populations in New York State are also really high, and that comes along with a lot of deer browsing. So it's hard to have healthy, regenerating forests when the deer are eating all of those new young trees that are growing back. We have homogeneous forest structure, and this really refers to forests that all look the same, forests that are the same age class and are structurally simple. One thing I'll talk about more as we go on today is how important structural complexity within our forest is for the success of birds in the breeding season. And playing into that is a lack of forest management. We talked about how birds need disturbance in areas where we haven't done a lot of management, and all of these challenges are reducing our forest health. We're seeing those declines happen more. So forest management can be a tool to address that. And then we also have a number of forest pests, insects, and diseases that we're dealing with, things like hemlock woolly adelgid, emerald ash borer, beech bark disease, beech leaf disease, no shortage of pests, unfortunately. And then there's climate change, which really kind of exacerbates a number of these challenges, as well as adds in a slew of new challenges. With climate change, we're seeing more extreme weather patterns, more drought, warmer winters where it's harder to do forest management and the grounds are or the soils are frozen, which is some of the best time to do management because it protects those soils. So a number of challenges that we aim to address through our work. I like to share this map because it shows forest cover across the United States. As you can see, New York and the Northeast in general are heavily forested. These forests are incredibly important for birds as they provide breeding habitat, migratory stopover habitat, and wintering or non-breeding ground habitat. It's also really important to note that the majority of the forests in the Northeast are privately owned. So in New York, about 75% of our forests are privately owned. So in order to address those challenges I just discussed, it's imperative that we engage with private landowners, which is a big focus of the work that our organizations do. So today we hope to talk through what managing for bird habitat really looks like and how private landowners can get involved. So we will highlight a lot of available resources and support and those funding opportunities I mentioned at the beginning. So hopefully you all walk away today with a lot of good, useful information. And then before we get into what management actually looks like, I want to share some of the benefits of managing for birds, other than that we love birds. But why should we care about birds and why should we care about these population declines that we are seeing? Well, birds are indicators of ecosystem health. When we see that those population declines are happening, it's a sign that our ecosystem health, our forest health is also declining. It's really a warning sign of, hey, something is going on here and we need to do something about it. Birds are also a charismatic and compelling taxa. They can help us inspire action and bring about a positive image of forest management. Not everybody understands why forest management is so important and why sometimes cutting down trees is good for the forest. So, birds can be a really great tool or lens to look through when we're explaining to people why forest management is so important. And then when we manage for birds, we can manage for a number of co-benefits at the same time. We can manage for things like climate resiliency, forest health, water quality, carbon capture, and manage for timber and non-timber forest products. Okay, so now we can start talking about management. When managing for bird habitat, it's important to think about it from multiple viewpoints. We want to think about both the landscape scale, or that kind of big picture view, as well as the stand level. What's going on your property or the section of your property that you're managing? So kind of both big picture and more focused view. And the reason that we do that is because birds interact with different types of forest on the landscape. Different age classes of forests support different species of birds, so it's important to think about both aspects of it. This graphic is meant to just kind of represent forest succession over time and give some examples of species that would use it. So on the left-hand side, we have our young forest or our early successional habitat. And species that might use that would be, American woodcock, golden-winged warbler, prairie warbler. And on the right-hand side, we have our mature forest and into our later successional forest. And we have species like wood thrush, black-throated blue warbler, and cerulean warbler. These are just a few examples. There's a lot of other birds that use these forests, but a few examples of priority species that we can aim to help through management. The important thing to note with that, though, is that that relationship isn't necessarily static. A lot of birds exhibit what we call patch trading, which is really where they're interacting with multiple forest types during the breeding season. So this is a pretty simplified graphic to show that. The example here shows the golden-winged warbler, which is an early successional nester. So they'll nest in regenerating young forests or shrublands. And when they're young, leave the nest or the post-fledging phase, they'll actually move to areas to look for more cover and protection, maybe stands that are 15 to 25-year-old pole stands that have kind of really dense cover, or mature forests with complex understories, again, for that protection and cover. And then the wood thrush, on the other hand, is a mature forest nesting species. And in the post-fledging phase, they might move to areas of younger forest that have more forage opportunities and things like that. So again, this is really just highlighting that birds are not staying in the same type of forest all breeding season. So it's important to have both types on the landscape. So how do we know what the right amount is or what we're looking for? When I talk about landscape today, I'm really referring to an area of about 2,500 acres. That's kind of what the literature shows birds might be interacting with throughout the breeding season. And on that landscape, we want to see both the young forest age class as well as the mature forest age class. From a bird habitat standpoint, we're calling young forests something that's about 0 to 10 years in age. So right after a disturbance or management, up to 10 years. And that can go a little bit longer or not as long, depending on site conditions. So plus or minus on that a little bit. And then we're considering a mature forest from a bird habitat context, 50 years and up. Now, we want to see about 10 to 20% of the landscape in the young forest condition. which really isn't a huge amount, but it does it doesn't stay on the landscape for a long time. So keeping that there and in the rotation is kind of the challenge. And that young forest is really important. It not only helps, accommodate that full breeding cycle, birds need both the young and mature forest, but it's really important for migratory stopover habitat. Those areas typically have a lot of forage opportunities, which again is really important for birds to stop over during migration, fuel up, and get ready for that big journey. So this workflow is meant to just kind of help you visualize how we work through that process when we're thinking about doing management or working on a parcel. Um, the first step is really to kind of zoom out from wherever you're working. Maybe you own 100 acres and you look at the 2,500 acres surrounding your property. And the first step is to really figure out how much of that is forested. There's not a lot of spots in New York where you're going to hit a 2,500 acre landscape that's only forest, right? There's going to be residential use, maybe a lot of agricultural use. So you got to figure out first how much of it is forested. Then you can figure out the breakdown of young forest versus mature forest. And really, the big goal of this, right, is to figure out, do we have the right mix of age classes on the landscape? And from there, that can inform the decisions that we're making at the stand level or on our own property. So it's just kind of that guide to really decide what the best thing to do on your property is. It's not always foolproof. Usually I'm doing this looking at aerial imagery in GIS. You can also use Google Earth or Onyx Maps, anywhere that you can kind of get that aerial imagery. So it's not going to be a perfect exact science, but it just helps guide those stand level decisions, which is what we'll talk about now. So there are a number of habitat features that can be created or improved through management. And I will kind of run through these. And this is, not every stand you're going to be able to think about every single one of these, or need to think about every single one. Maybe you already have some good things going on, but some different things that we look at include vertical structural diversity. And what this really refers to is having multiple layers of vegetation within your stand. So a stand with high vertical structural diversity is going to have an overstory, a midstory, an understory, and that's going to provide birds with all of the places they need to nest, forage, seek cover, raise their young. So it's going to benefit a lot of birds at the same time. Birds can be really particular about where they want to be in the stand, where they want to build their nest, where they want to forage. So by having that structural complexity, you accommodate a bunch of different birds at the same time. And then we also want to think about species diversity in our stand and promoting native, non-invasive plants. So when I talk about species diversity, I mean not only your overstory trees, but also in your midstory and your understory. We want to see shrubs and herbaceous plants. And having that species diversity really ensures that we have ample food sources from year to year for birds, as well as accommodating nesting site preferences and things like that. And now our native plants are going to hold a lot more value than invasive plants. Our native trees and shrubs support a higher abundance and diversity of insect species, which are really important for birds during the breeding season. That's a huge part of their diet. That's what they're feeding their young while they're in the nest. And our native plants also produce more nutritious seeds and berries. Again, really important as birds fuel up and prep for migration towards the end of the breeding season. We also want to think about things like large diameter trees. Large diameter trees are important nesting sites, especially for raptors and owls. There's also a number of canopy nesting songbirds. Then we have softwood inclusions, and really this just refers to having conifer trees in your stand that's predominantly hardwoods. When we have some additional softwoods, it adds a lot of habitat value because there are a number of birds that really seek out conifers, trees like hemlock for foraging opportunities, cover opportunities, nesting sites. So even a small cluster of like less than an acre would add a lot of habitat value and attract other species Species like hermit thrush and black-throated green warbler are really strongly associated with hemlock, for example. We also want to think about dead standing trees or snags and cavity trees. This is something that I think a lot of people already associate with wildlife and birds, which is great because they are really important. Again, it's forage sites, nesting sites, perching sites. They hold a lot of value. And down woody material, also really important, having logs and different sizes of wood on the ground offers more forage, more protection, more nesting sites. It's important to have down woody material in kind of different stages of decay. We want to think about having riparian buffers around our waterways, kind of protecting that area. Those often act as really important wildlife corridors. And then one thing that I think a lot of folks don't think about when we're thinking about forest management is leaf litter. But leaf litter is particularly important to birds because it's a really big source of invertebrates for ground foragers. Species like wood thrush just kind of flip around in the leaf litter searching for insects. So leaf litter is one of those things that we want to think about as well. That one's a little tricky from a management standpoint because you typically either have enough leaf litter or you don't, but there's some ways to think about protecting it if you're doing work in your woods and managing it, like reducing the amount of area that you bring in heavy equipment and things like that. Now, this is a pretty quick run through of all of these things, but there's so many available resources that we can share with folks if people are interested in learning more about this. And this is also what we do when we're working with landowners is kind of teach you and help assess habitat and talk through all of these different conditions. Now, I want to talk through kind of how those apply to specific species so you can see how that might vary a little bit or what that actually looks like to support individual species. We're going to talk a lot today about golden-winged warbler as we get into some of our example scenarios. So I'll start with that. The golden-winged warbler is a species that's experienced really steep population declines. In New York, they're typically found in the St. Lawrence Valley. That's part of the Great Lakes population. And there's also a population that's found in the lower Hudson Valley. That population used to come together, but that range has really shrunk over time. It's a species that nests in the young forest or shrubland, that early successional habitat. And this is a species where we really want to push to be at that 20% of young forests on the landscape. They need a lot of young forests on the landscape, these kind of bigger patches of that. You'll find them in a predominantly deciduous forested landscape as well. And they're an interesting bird to manage for. I think it's really fun because there's a lot of kind of complexity to what they need. They're a species that still does need some overstory trees, but not a ton, and they need to be kind of irregularly spaced. Those overstory trees are important to them. They use them for perching and singing. Then they need a lot of shrub cover. So the kind of majority of the stand that you'll find them in is going to have shrub covers, again, kind of irregularly spaced around, and that'll all be filled in with herbaceous cover, hopefully things like grasses, forbs, stuff like goldenrod is important to this species. And then you're going to find them in different habitat in the post-fledging phase. So nearby to that nesting habitat, we also need to provide that post-fledging phase habitat. So that dense sapling regeneration, maybe a 15 to 25-year-old stand where there's more cover and protection, or that mature forest that has a complex understory. The next species I'll talk about is the cerulean warbler, another species that's experienced steep population declines. This is one that uses forests that kind of exhibit late successional forest characteristics, which what that means is there's a lot more complexity of forest that's kind of experienced a lot of natural disturbance. So they like that mature forest, but with a lot of openings and canopy gaps. They like forests with white oak trees, hickories, and sugar maples. You'll typically find their nest in a large diameter tree, usually near one of those canopy gaps, but they still need a lot of that understory structure. They use grapevine in their nest, kind of an interesting fact, something we think about from a forestry perspective. Sometimes we'll really work to get rid of grapevine in a stand because it can become a nuisance. But if we're managing for cerulean warbler, we might want to leave a little bit of it. In their post-fledging phase, they'll also use those dense pole stands, and they might move to areas of the mature forest that have slightly more closed canopies. The wood thrush is another mature forest nesting species. They are going to be found in deciduous or mixed forests, but they like a large forest tract, a large intact forest of at least 200 acres, that tall closed canopy, so not as open as the cerulean warbler, but they still need some vertical structure, especially in the mid-story. That's where they build their nest, and they need that leaf litter for foraging. And their post-fledging phase is going to be somewhere with a robust understory or a young forest. Now, I don't expect anyone to go home and have this all memorized and know exactly how to take this and do management on their property. Really, what I wanted to highlight is that those stand conditions and what we do to kind of achieve them does vary a little bit for different species. And as we talk through some of the management examples today, you'll see what that looks like on properties in the St. Lawrence Valley. But you'll also learn how staff, like all of us, can help you implement this work. So I am going to pass it over to Spencer now, who's going to talk about some work that they work on over at the Thousand Islands Land Trust.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I very much appreciate the introduction. A lot of detail there. So I wanted to put a few slides to show a good case study of what a golden wing warbler habitat management project looks like on the ground in particular. But before I get into that, a very brief introduction. The Thousand Islands Land Trust, we're a nonprofit land conservation organization. We're based right in Clayton, New York. So if you're ever up in the Thousand Islands region of New York State, please stop by our office. We'd love to chat with you about conservation opportunities. But yeah, we've been around since 1985. We've just celebrated our 40th year of existence. And we've done some really great conservation work with a lot of the partners and local land trusts and government agencies that we work with regularly. Our mission, our motto is to conserve the natural beauty, the diverse wildlife habitats, the water quality, and outdoor recreation opportunities of the Thousand Islands, the larger St. Lawrence River Valley, basically from the eastern end of Lake Ontario up through the northern parts of St. Lawrence County. So it's a relatively large service area. But the conservation opportunities there, they seem endless. We have a lot of opportunities to protect some really important species, while also protecting some water quality and getting folks out on the land. Ultimately, the goal of our organization is to balance the built and natural environments, uh, pretty much creating a better quality of life for folks that are living here, visiting here, working here, playing here. We want to see that balance and make sure that we have conserved habitats so that we can enjoy the species that we all enjoy, so that there's recreational opportunities that don't infringe upon those rare and threatened species, that we have clean water to drink, and so on. Since 1984, we have conserved just about over 15,000 acres of land, which is, it's a fairly sizable chunk, but there's more good work to do. And once you actually conserve a piece of property, then you can assess it thoroughly to say, okay, where are the management opportunities? What can I improve on this landscape to make it more functional ecologically and for those other conservation and natural resource values? Have you advance to the next slide? Just a very brief by the numbers slide here. As mentioned, we've been around for about 40 years. In that time, we've conserved about 15,000 acres of land. Of that, we own about 9,500 acres. So that's a major opportunity to get in and actually adjust and manipulate and manage the landscape for those benefits. In addition to that, we have 5,600 acres under conservation easement. These are privately held lands that have conservation restrictions on the properties that limit certain rights. For example, rights to mining, rights to subdivision, rights to clear cutting. Some of those rights have been removed from the property while you still get to own it and enjoy it, to hunt on it, to just generally recreate and enjoy your private conservation property. Of those lands that we own and concern, 10 of them are signature preserves. These are open to the public. It's where we have our trail systems, for example, where we can focus public access while also trying to limit impact and overlap with some of the more sensitive and rare habitats and species. On those preserves, we host about 22 miles of trails. What's not on this slide, though, is land trusts as a whole across New York State. These are just a few snapshots, stats from New York State. There's 88 land trusts in New York that protect about 2 million acres. That's a sizable chunk. Of that, 500,000 acres are owned in fee, meaning the land trust owns them outright. So that's a major opportunity for habitat improvement and restoration. So our organization has been doing this for about a decade now, going in and managing and manipulating landscapes for habitat improvement and other benefits. And so it's something that we see more and more of as our organization grows and matures. Oh, there we go. The next slide here is really where I'd like to get into the case study. This is our Otter Creek Preserve. It's in Alex Bay. If there's anyone that's native to Northern New York, if you've been to the Alex Bay drive-in movie theaters, that's a good reference on the landscape. This property is just behind that as you enter the village of Alex Bay. Walking distance to the village is just over 100 acres. And about 10 to 12 years ago, Tilt, in partnership with the Indian River Lakes Conservancy and the DEC and Audubon, we teamed up to submit a Land Trust Alliance Conservation Partnership Program Catalyst grant to basically identify some restoration opportunities for the golden wing warbler, a threatened species in our that really depends on our area, and to create demonstration sites so that people could come out, view these sites, and say, "Hey, that sort of landscape management aligns with my property. It aligns with what I'd like to see on the landscape." And so this particular property, the signature preserve of ours, does just that. There is a nice hiking trail across the property, and it is it has a number of different habitat types that this partnership was able to identify and prescribe management activities for to improve golden wing warblers on this site. I'll have you advance. Thank you. Here's just a quick overlay from the management plan that was derived from that original golden wing warbler partnership in 2015. Essentially what we had here was a little over 100 acres, and we were able to separate it into 3 management units. As you can see from a lot of the surrounding landscape, we have open pasture, open hayfield, agricultural properties. On the waterfront, though, we have a nice, dense, mature forest. And in between, we have this somewhat uneven aged, succeeding shrubland, grassland, interspersed with forest. And really, this landscape hadn't been touched or manipulated in a couple of decades, a few decades, actually. And so it was starting to grow to be a bit monotypic in those young shrubland areas and young forest areas. And so we were able to go in and actually do some management practices to improve the overall diversity on the site. And as Claire had mentioned earlier, we don't need 2,500 acres to operate in. We don't need even 100 acres to operate in. It really is about the landscape scale and looking at the bigger picture across the landscape. You may only own 10 acres, 15, 20 acres, but depending on how that fits into the larger puzzle, that is really something that's worth looking at, because we're not going to have a hard and fast threshold saying, no, we shouldn't manage this landscape because it's too small. That's not a good way to go about it. Now, we also want to identify management units where there's suitable restoration. As Kate or Claire mentioned earlier, there's a number of things we want to avoid. We want to avoid riparian areas, other sensitive habitats, rare species that we know are utilizing the property at existing species. So we were able to actually take a snapshot of this property, go in, do a biological assessment of it, then prescribe some management, which I'll have some photographs here on the coming slides. This was a photograph from the Unit 2, where you had some young forest that was starting to encroach upon an overgrown fallow pasture or a field setting. And what we had was a really hard forest edge that opened up to just a mowed grassland or mowed field. And that really is not suitable for golden wing warblers. We want to see more of a softer feathered edge. So we were able to go in, with some chainsaws, very minor cutting work here to help create more of a softened, tapered edge, feathered edge to that forest as it leads up to more of the mature, um, both mix of hardwood and conifer species in the primary forest stand. So it's important to identify those zones, come in and imitate disturbance. I think that's something that we really need to strike home on, is that we need disturbance in the landscape. This particular species needs disturbance in the landscape. So in order to create the maximum amount of diversity, we need to go in there and actually do some hands-on management, creating more of a mosaic of habitats versus just anything that's homogeneous or monotypic or even layered. So I'll have you advance one more slide. Thank you. And some of this is a little bit more than just handwork with hand saws and chainsaws. If you have an area, a fallow pasture that has sat vacant for a decade, maybe 2 or 3 decades at this point, you get a lot of encroaching shrubland with buckthorn and honeysuckle and other invasive plants that really create an incredibly dense canopy of shrubs. And that is not necessarily suitable for golden-winged warblers either. While you do need a shrub-rich environment, upwards of 40, 50, sometimes 60% shrubland cover, we need some of those open areas around the clumps of shrubs to create that herbaceous layer that they depend on. Where you have maybe 6 or 8 mature trees on the edge of this, and then it butts up against a larger forest block. So they really need that diversity, both at the micro scale and at the landscape scale. And so that's what this original grant did for us back in 2015. It allowed us to put the prescriptions onto the property and actually hire the equipment or rent the equipment and hire the work to clear the shrublands, open up some of these pockets. And fortunately, the staff at the Land Trust has experienced equipment operators that are very comfortable operating these machines, very heavy machines that are really, really impressive. And I will say the result looks somewhat like a war zone. I had one landowner say, well, that's no English garden, and that's a fact. It doesn't look like something that's suitable for anything after you're done with this because it's a bit messy. There's, branches and twigs and trees down, and you may rut up some soil here and there, but if you give it time to heal back over, and then you do monitoring after the management, you will be surprised at what comes back, not only from avian species like golden wing warblers, but grouse and woodcock and turkeys and deer and all the small game that so many of us enjoy up here in northern New York. So again, it's imitating that disturbance, maximizing the amount of diversity, creating that mosaic. As part of that original grant in 2015, we were able to include a public engagement component. Obviously, we wanted to open up a recreational trail here, which we have. It's over a 2-mile trail loop that we have on our Otter Creek Preserve. And we were able to include some interpretive panels that describe the habitat work that was just completed at this demonstration site. So if you visit this site, I highly recommend that if you're up in the Thousand Islands region, please, I invite you to visit our Otter Creek Preserve. It does provide suitable breeding habitat. We have a warbler walk on an annual basis that gets people out onto the landscape in May and June when these birds are here breeding and really vocal. And finally, this is another photo from our Otter Creek Preserve that overlooks this demonstration site. So you can see really a bird's eye view down into these dense shrub clumps into the young forest. It's a great opportunity to get out on the landscape, see some wildlife, and also get a different perspective than what you might see from the ground. Now, I do want to turn it over to our straddling property, which is just a couple miles away from our Otter Creek Preserve as the crow flies. Another property that has immediately adjacent agricultural fields, row crop fields. On the opposite side of the property is a mature hemlock stand, riparian habitat that we really didn't want to disturb. And in between, we had a fallow pasture setting that was aging and succeeding into a very thick and dense site that was almost too dense and not suitable for golden-winged warblers anymore. So as part of the 2015 grant, we went in and opened up a handful of pockets. But as part of the current Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant program, we're able to go in, reopen those pockets up after 10 years. If anyone has been able to identify a specific landscape, drive by a property that's maybe sitting fallow, after 5 years, you really notice the shrub starting to take over. After 10 years, it's almost unrecognizable. So you really do need to have some sort of repetition or continued maintenance of these sites to keep that disturbance alive, to keep that habitat diversity on the ground. And so here's another photograph. This is a skid steer mounted FECON unit, or a forestry mulcher or masticator. And this is a very heavy piece of equipment, and it does an amazing job at clearing some of the densest shrublands. Winter, as Claire mentioned, winter is a great time to get in and clear land with one of these units because the ground is frozen and the plants are a little more brittle when it's frozen, and they're less likely to clog up the machine. So again, winter is a great opportunity to get in and perform some of this management work. I will have you jump to the next slide, which is going to be kind of zooming in and out at the landscape of our straddling property. I'm going to share my screen now, Claire, if I can. Zooming out, as mentioned, you have, Cranberry Creek Wildlife Management Area. You have a riparian corridor where my cursor is here, some vernal pools and wetlands and larger ponded areas. Really, you want to avoid disturbance in those areas. You also had a very hard edge along some of these agricultural fields. And so when we're doing this work, how the heck can you see what you're doing when there's 12 foot of brush all the way around you and you're just swimming in a sea of brush and young forest? Well, fortunately, we now have technology that can allow us to get a bird's eye view and almost a real-time ortho imagery while the management is happening, so it can inform the on-the-ground management practices. So this is our straddling property here. As I zoom in, the lighter color is a drone imagery that was flown on August 8th of this year. And as you can see, it's primarily in this area that's adjacent to the agricultural fields. This is all fallow pasture, very shallow soils, and it was succeeding up into brush that was anywhere from 6 to 12, sometimes 15 feet high. But it was interspersed with a handful of pockets of mature trees, as well as some areas where you had existing herbaceous layers. So it started with a really nice diversity, but we wanted to get in there and improve it as best we could. So I'm going to use this little slider function now. As I unveil what's behind, the new image was taken on October 14th. This is what we were able to do with that forestry skid steer mulcher. Essentially come in, open up some of the densest areas of the shrubland, leaving behind some of the mature hardwood trees, leaving some of the softwoods, though we did want to get rid of a lot of the conifers, and creating, it's not hard edges. We're not creating lawns here. We want to have a really complex system when we're done. So using this sort of technology allows us to manage almost real time, to say, no, we need to push back deeper into this quadrant, or maybe we don't go as deep in this next quadrant. So I just wanted to give that quick shout out to Drone Deploy. It's a great technology that guides our management when you're in a sea of brush. And really, it comes down to monitoring and long-term maintenance of these sites. Yes, it's good to brush hog some areas around the clumps, maybe every 3 to 4 years, but every 10 to 15 years, you may need to go back in with one of these heavier pieces of equipment. But don't be afraid. That's what this group is working on here. Use us as resources. We are here to help you through that process. It's really not intimidating, despite seeing the big equipment and the landscape shifts. That's really all I have. I guess I will pass it on to Claire.
Thank you, Spencer. That was great. Okay, so not to be confusing, since I am staff with Audubon, but I'm also going to share a little bit of information about work that's happened on the Indian River Lakes Conservancy property, as Audubon was originally involved in this project almost 10 years ago. So the project I'll be discussing happened at the Grand Lake Reserve, which is a property owned by IRLC. It's an over 1,000-acre preserve. You can kind of see the map here. There's some nice hiking trails. And this is an area where we've done some golden-winged warbler work. So, kind of as Spencer talked about, this all came together due to all of these different partners collaborating. So, over 10 years ago, till IRLC, Audubon, Clarkson University, New York State DEC, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology all came together to form the St. Lawrence Valley Partnership for Golden-Winged Warblers. And this collaborative group were awarded a grant to help raise awareness for the importance of golden-winged warbler habitat management in the St. Lawrence Valley. And a big part of that grant was the establishment of these demonstration sites. So these demonstration sites are great because they're public places where, we can bring folks and really highlight what this management looks like, why it's so important. And Grand Lake Reserve was identified as a good spot to create one of those demo sites. So back in about 2014, 2015, Audubon staff, Andy Heinickel, who still works for Audubon, but he works for a different state program now, he wrote a management plan for the site to provide recommendations for how to better enhance the quality of the habitat there. Now, this photo was taken in 2014. You can see what the site looked like. It has that herbaceous layer, some shrubs, some of the overstory trees. You'll see from the next slide some aerial imagery that helps really show what it looked like, but it had some good habitat there, but there was a lot of opportunity to expand on that. So this aerial imagery really helps kind of envision that. It's about a 15-acre area, and they identified two different management units, so Unit 1 and Unit 2. Unit 1 was largely composed of that herbaceous layer. That's kind of where that picture was that we just saw. It also had shrubs like dogwood, invasive honeysuckle, and then there was denser canopy cover at the unit edges. And then for Unit 2, that one was a little bit more dense, mature forest, more canopy cover, but there was still a lot of shrubs interspersed in there, things like dogwood and arrowwood. So for this project, some of the management recommendations included thinning that canopy cover. Golden-winged warbler still needs some mature overstory trees, but not a ton. So bringing that down and kind of irregularly spacing them. And we also wanted to come in with a brush hog or a forestry mulcher like Spencer just showed to kind of break up some of those shrub clumps, make it more irregular and complex. A big part of this too was to identify and remove invasive species. Things like honeysuckle were present on the property. So really making sure that while we're doing this work, we're promoting native species. And then also thinking about feathering the transition to the mature forest edge. So this site's surrounded really by mature forest. And when we talk about feathering that edge, you can kind of think about it almost as like making a staircase up until the edge of the forest. So really kind of making it a smooth transition rather than an abrupt transition. This is a couple of photos from the management. Like Spencer said, sometimes this management, when it first happens, it looks crazy. It looks like a bomb went off, but you'll see on the next slide, it comes back. It doesn't look like this forever. It can be a little intense and jarring at first. You can see in the first picture there, that's where they reduced a lot of the overstory cover. They are also targeting some of those coniferous trees. Golden-winged warblers prefer mostly deciduous trees, so if there's an opportunity to reduce some of those conifers, that's great. And they also brought in that forestry mulcher there to help, break up some of the brush, break up some of those shrubs, which really essentially those forestry mulchers are just a metal drum with teeth on it that just kind of like eat up everything in front of them. They're pretty cool how much work they can get done in one area. Now, this site, Originally, in that management plan that Andy wrote, he included some recommendations to think about on an annual basis or, every other year to go back in and kind of continue mowing, so you didn't have to bring in as large equipment, really could have just done some of it with a brush hog to keep that complexity and that kind of mimic of the disturbance. Also thinking about monitoring and treating any kind of woody regrowth as necessary or invasive species as necessary. Unfortunately, that didn't necessarily happen, which, happens with these projects. Sometimes there's a lot of staff turnover, there's a lot of different priorities. Not to say that this didn't remain quality habitat, it still has been a great site, but now as we think about refreshing the site, there's just a little bit more to do. So this is a photo that Steve took at the end of last summer, and you can see now that it's really that kind of like contiguous shrub layer. So this is when we would want to think about coming back in and breaking up that shrub layer, bringing in a forestry mulcher, kind of running through that to break that up and promote that herbaceous layer that's so important. Here, we would still want to reassess canopy cover and reduce trees as necessary. Probably not net needed in this site because there was some residual trees that were elm trees that have died since the last management, so that kind of took care of itself. There are invasive species on the site. There's still honeysuckle, some buckthorn, pale swallowwort, so some things that need to be addressed as well. And the one thing I also want to say is this site does still support golden-winged warblers. We were just out here last June for a woods walk, which was really great, but we did see golden-winged warblers while we were there, and it's really been supporting them for a number of years now. But with that in mind, just because the birds are there doesn't mean that it's the best quality habitat possible. We know this is growing out of ideal conditions, so now is the perfect time to go back in there because birds are still using it and they'll come back if we kind of continue to make it better. So just a note that just because you see a bird there doesn't mean that it's the best quality habitat possible and you don't have to do anything. That is all I have on that site. So I'm going to pass it over to Jeff now, who's going to talk a little bit about the USDA and the NRCS and some funding opportunities.
Thanks, Claire. Appreciate that. Yeah, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the complexities and kind of what can be scary and daunting from a private forest owner who may be relatively unfamiliar with all of the jargon we just spoke about and thinking about they're not a part of a land trust, and what can they do for their forests and for wildlife on their forests. And the good news is there's lots you can do. There's plenty of opportunities and plenty of partners out there that are ready, willing, and able to help you with this. A huge, huge, huge collaborator, partner, resource for private forest owners, private landowners is the USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service. This is what they do. When their phones ring and their emails ding, they are out there to help private landowners do good things for the land and for wildlife. This comes in the form of free technical and financial assistance to be able to make projects a reality. There are several NRCS conservation programs that are available to you to seek out information on that would apply to the various practices that we've been discussing today. So there's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, there's a Conservation Stewardship Program, Regional Conservation Partnership Programs, Working Lands for Wildlife, just to name a few. Next slide, please, Claire. So of those, the star of our show here this evening, one of the stars being the golden-winged warbler, there is a program called Working Lands for Wildlife, for which the golden-winged warbler since 2012 has been a focal species for that program. And you can see any of the brown polygon here in the map to the right if you're a private landowner and you fall within that particular shade of brown, then you could be eligible for cost share assistance, as well as certainly technical advice through a variety of partners that are working with NRCS to help deliver working lands for wildlife golden wing warbler. And that can take on two forms. What you see at the bottom, that kind of like what we've been looking at a lot, is that shrubland community type. But also, these programs are there to help your forests be healthy as well, and to put a little bit of young forest into maybe an otherwise mature forest tract. It's a program that we like to call a win-win. It's a win-win because you have opportunities for landowners to do good things for their forests and to do good things for the productivity of that forest, as in kind of like the economic opportunities, and to do that work in a way that is sustainable. To think about the future health of that forest, the current health and the future health and productivity of the forest. The other part of that win-win is that it is if done right, it's helping to recover imperiled at-risk wildlife species like the golden wing warbler. But important to many landowners, just as important, if not more important, than doing the work to benefit at-risk species, are all of the other associated species that benefit. The many game species that utilize these same communities that are restored and enhanced, as well as pollinators. Pollinators have been shown to show tremendous response to the creation of young forest and shrubland communities. Next slide, please. So this can be daunting. All of what we were talking about, and the process can be a little bit scary, if I'm honest with you, if we're thinking about all of this right out the gate and you've never done this before in your forest or in your shrubland. Rest assured that NRCS has a very tried and true process, the 9-step conservation process that they apply to these projects with landowners. And and yeah, this graph that you see here, or this picture that you see here, figure, it has 3 phases and 9 parts, 9 steps. It looks, it kind of has arrows, and that kind of can be a little bit scary as well. But it's about assessing, it's about making some decisions, and then it's about acting on those decisions, right? Implementing some kind of an action to better your forest or whatever your resource might be that you want to improve. And you all do this all the time. I promise. This is maybe not in the forest context, but when we think about ourselves as homeowners and we have a house, right? We periodically, hey, just like those land trusts, you protect something, you still need to be a good steward of that land. When you buy a home, you know that you still need to be a good steward of that home if it's going to maintain its value and provide you with the shelter, warmth that you need throughout the time you have that home. Periodically, you do an assessment. You're looking at the roof, you're looking at the chimney, you're looking at the steps, the siding, the windows. Hey, you may want to enhance that house. You might want to put on an addition, right? These are the things that you do as a homeowner. Then all of a sudden you say, all right, I've done this assessment. Now I need to kind of prioritize. What's the next step? Here, I got some repairs and improvements that my assessment kind of said that I need to be thinking about. So then you prioritize those things. And then you go to work. You make some decisions. You say, we're going to allocate some resources. Hey, the roof needs to be fixed first. And then you fix that roof, you mark it off, and you move on to the next. It's it's really no different. Your forest and forest stewardship is really the same kind of process that one goes through when they're thinking about how they're going to be good stewards of their own home and how they're going to maintain value of their home and maintain value of their forest. So don't think that you can't do this. I'm here to serve more as a cheerleader, I think, this evening, to let you know and encourage you to do good things for your land, for the forest wildlife that you have, and that you can do that. You can do that, next slide, please, because there are a lot of partners out there to help you. NRCS is the driving force. It's their program, their field offices. You have a service center near you. Almost every county in the country has an NRCS service center. And I encourage you to find that service center closest to you and to go in and start to have a conversation with those NRCS folks. They're welcoming. They're going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to find ways to work with you to improve your lands, to improve your operation if you're a producer. And just know that NRCS depends on other partners like us to help them, help landowners deliver these conservation programs. So NRCS has a rich history of working with conservation organizations like the American Bird Conservancy, Ruffed Grouse Society, Audubon, National Wild Turkey Federation, Pheasants Forever, and on and on. They they play key, their staff play key roles to help overcome bottlenecks in the delivery of an NRCS conservation program. Starts with a site visit and some data collection by a forester to draft a forest management plan for your property, no matter how small. And then to be thinking about, hey, we want to act on that plan. We want to we want to enroll in one of the conservation programs. And then our staff will also help with the process of implementing that particular portions of implementing that particular conservation practice that you may want to do, like creating some golden wing warbler habitat through shrubland enhancement or doing a sustainable timber harvest that we see here. Doing it in a way that meets the habitat needs of species that's the target for this program, the golden wing warbler. The scattered residual overstory and everything else ready to make that herbaceous and woody stem density exactly like what golden wing warblers and associated species need. And I can imagine a few of you putting a tree stand in one of those residual trees not long after that treatment is done for sure. So I encourage you, seek out your closest USDA service center, see what your woods can do for wildlife, have an NRCS field office staff and a conservation partner come out and visit with you on your property, understand what your objectives are, listen to your objectives, listen to what your goals are for the property, and see if we can find a way to make some of those goals and objectives become a reality. And remember, you're not in it alone. Next slide. And you're not in it alone. We have plenty of resources available for you, whether it's in written form or in human body form. We're here to help you. We will help you through every step of the process. We will help you not be so nervous about the process and give you that reassurance that might allow you to actually move forward and act on doing some of the things that you'd like to do in your woods for wildlife. Start out with strong data collection, science-driven, forest science-driven planning, and let that ultimately materialize into woods and warblers, which is what we really want to see in a win-win situation. And I thank you for listening, and you are more than welcome to contact us after the webinar or in the coming days to learn more about NRCS opportunities.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm just going to share a little bit more today before we wrap up. I want to share some information on an additional option for financial assistance. So the reason that all of these partners are here today and collaborating is in part due to a grant that we've been awarded. The goal of this grant is to increase the quality of forest and shrubland bird habitat for species like golden winged warbler. The map there on the screen shows the geography of this grant kind of outlined in yellow, so really the St. Lawrence Valley. And we aim to support landowners in this region by providing technical assistance, really walking through what this type of management looks like on the ground and providing financial assistance to actually implement these projects because they do come at a cost and not all of them you're going to be able to do as a commercial sale or something like that. So there's costs associated with it, and we hope to fill that gap with financial assistance. Now, this is kind of similar to what Jeff just described with NRCS, where we're here to provide that expertise and support and walk you through the whole process. But to be clear, this is a separate program from NRCS. This funding comes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through their Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So we've been awarded this grant and then given these funds that we can then pass through to landowners who have projects that we're working on. So it's a great alternative if you just kind of want to get your toes into it, see what this is like, or you don't really want to work with NRCS, or sometimes working with NRCS can take a long time. There's a lot of demand, so it doesn't always work out kind of in the timeline. So this is just us trying to fill that gap and provide an alternate route as well. So again, we're really looking for people who are interested in implementing this type of management. We're here to walk you through, teach you about how exactly to do it if you think that you have, a property where you'd like to do this work. And kind of in conjunction with that on the ground work that we're doing outreach like this webinar, and we're also planning an in-person event in the spring. So it's really helpful to see this in person. So our idea right now is to go out to that tilt property that Spencer just showed us where they've just done some recent management, and also visit the Grand Lake Reserve demo site that I talked about. So you can do a little compare and contrast of this is what fresh management looks like. This is what it looks like after it's regrown, and we can talk through some of the work that needs to go there. So you really get to see both sides of it. So definitely recommend that if you're interested in seeing some of the in-person things. With all that in mind, if you're interested in learning more or connecting on this grant, I'm going to be the main point person for now. So that's my email there. I'll also have it on the last slide and we can share it in the chat too. So you can reach out to me and we can start talking about things, answering questions, and then go from there. We might bring in some of the other folks on this call. But I'm just the first point of contact. And then the last thing that I want to share, if I can get my slide to change, is that there are a lot of resources out there. So beyond us and us directly answering your questions, there are a number of written guides. We went over a lot of information today, which can be pretty overwhelming. So I wanted to highlight these. Audubon has put together some really great kind of comprehensive forest management for birds guides, both for landowners and foresters that kind of go into a little bit more detail. But there are also a number of species-specific guides on species like golden winged warbler. There's a great guide that really details out what that habitat management work looks like in our region, what the best management practices are. And there's guides for a number of other species as well. So happy to share this resource with anybody who's interested. And that is all I have. So I think we will, actually, let me put this up. There's my contact information. We can also drop that in the chat. But I'll stop sharing and then we can open it up to questions. Okay. So if folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm about to type my email into the chat so folks have that as well.
I'll throw out a quick comment. Jeff was just starting to touch on that a little bit. What's good for the bird is good for the herd. And so, you get a lot of deer hunters up here, and this is a great opportunity to maybe open up some of that land that you've let go fallow for a while also having a positive benefit for these rare, threatened, and special concern species. So, don't let the fact that it's about the birds be something that's going to get in the way of your objectives here. Let's see if we can check a lot of boxes, improve the forest, do what's good for the bird, also open up some recreational opportunities for you out there in the deer woods.
Yeah, that's a great point, Spencer. I've been assisting NRCS with Working Lands for Wildlife projects across many states in the eastern U.S. since 2012, and probably over 450 landowners by now, program wide. And I kind of joked about a tree stand and the residual tree, but it is, we monitor these sites for songbirds in the spring in many years, and I can't tell you how many tree stands we see in those sites, and also conversations with those landowners who talk about how, they've harvested the biggest buck that they've harvested, and grandpa owned the land and dad owned the land, and just it's just tremendous to see the excitement that comes with that outcome. That's different than, a bird is nesting in that forest as well. It's kind of like it's like the icing on the cake.
Also, I just realized, which this might be what is happening, when I saw nobody saying anything in the chat, it wasn't on. So it should be available now. It's working for us. So apologies to everybody. It should be working now.
This is Steve. I want to just add that this whole process is so people-centric. You're going to run into amazing people, many of us from teaching backgrounds, who want to help you help the birds. And this whole process is just fantastic. And we look forward to having you come out to our lands at Tilt and Indian River Lakes Conservancy to see on the ground what is going on. Thank you.
There we go. We have some stuff in
The
the chat
chats are
now.
coming.
I was like, this is a quiet group. I'll look through for questions and then I can read them to the group. Linda from Tug Hill Tomorrow Land Trust mentioned that they're looking to do some golden winged warbler work. Not necessarily a question, but just a note. So Linda, definitely feel free to reach out to us. Would love to help with your project.
Shout out to Tug Hill. That's my peoples.
So yeah, Linda, yeah, she then asked what other steps they can take to help us. Just reach out to us, Linda. You can reach out to my email and I can start to kind of walk you through the process or share resources and talk about what you have going on at the Land Trust.
Hi, Linda. It's Steve. We were with Linda on an owl prowl just Saturday night. So it's all family here with what's going on.
So Martin asks, how wide of a feathered edge do you typically recommend for a mature forest on the edge of a pasture? Jeff, would you want to take that question?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you'd want to take into account is what that edge would look like, and even the feathered edge you want to make sure is between what would become the shrubland and the young forest and the mature forest is not uniform straight line. I would say that you're probably going to want to be somewhere in the order of 50, probably 50 yards. You could do, and I'm speaking from a golden wing perspective. You certainly can do a little bit less, say maybe 30, if you're interested in having benefits for other shrubland species and pollinators. Other shrubland species that would be a little bit less sensitive to that area requirement would be things like common yellowthroats and indigo buntings and eastern towhees, field sparrows. There's a whole variety, American woodcock. There's a variety of species there that would be a little bit less sensitive to the width of that feathered edge. But There's a reason why the golden wing warbler is in trouble. It is a finicky bird, and it really has some habitat requirements that make that make its own problems for itself, if you will.
Martin says thank you, so thanks.
Welcome.
That's all we have in the chat for now, but we can still kind of hang out for a minute if people have other thoughts that pop up. And again, if you think of anything later or want more information, just reach out to me and I'm happy to share and help in whatever way I can.
Yeah, no question is too silly or small. We're here to answer any of the questions you might have. This can be a this can be a scary first initial thought about doing something to your forests. Our fo our forests are important to us. The forests we own are, we have a deep connection with them. Many of them have been, those forests have been with us for generations. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have landowners that are just first-time forest owners, and they're really nervous about, oh my gosh, I've got this forest now, and how am I supposed to take care of it, and what am I supposed to do? And it's a lot of information being thrown at me, but it really just starts with your desire to want to learn more, and just know that we're here to have those conversations, no matter how short they are or how long they are. Our careers are spent trying to be helpful to those that are making the stewardship decisions that benefit wildlife and healthy forests.
So we do have another question in the chat from Lucas. How would you suggest managing a swamp area with mostly conifers in the 40 to 50 year age range and a limited understory? So I can take this to start, and then Jeff, you probably have some additional thoughts to throw in. Swamp areas, wet areas get a little more complicated, right? Because we want to be careful about the management we're doing in there to not create a lot of disturbance. That doesn't mean that we can't do anything. One of the first things that I'd look at is, do we have invasives or interfering vegetation? Is there a way to kind of control that to continue to promote the native community that's there? Now, the limited understory could be happening for a number of reasons. When we have really wet soils, stuff's not always going to grow. So kind of thinking about the site might be part of why you have that limited understory, and might not be a lot that you can do to change that, and that's not necessarily a negative thing. So it just gets a little tricky in those areas, and I guess what I'm saying is maybe don't worry too much about that lack of understory, because it might just be a sign that the soils aren't there to support, like young trees and things like that. Jeff,
Yeah,
additional thoughts on that?
yeah, I would just say that those sites are a little bit trickier than others, and that's really where having someone come out and just walk in the swamp with you, and to kind of look at some of those finer details. Um, Not having a regeneration layer is, of course, a concern in many forests. We want to have, right? We want to have the young members of the congregation, if you will, just as much as you want to have the older members, and that's really a symbol of a healthy forest, whether it's a swamp forest or an upland forest. And there are some things I'm wondering, is this more or less a hemlock swamp? And there are some things that can be done to encourage hemlock regeneration. Hemlock is a forest type that is in a lot of trouble, as we all know, especially even further south where winters aren't nearly as bad. But having healthy regeneration in that swamp is going to be great for things like a Canada warbler, for example. You can have tremendous benefits, but it is tricky. And all of that work would be done by hand. In almost all cases, we wouldn't bring any heavy equipment in there. That kind of work is going to be done with saw and humans on foot.
Yep. We have a question from Nicholas that says, after management is implemented, is there a formal process to monitor whether the focal species are actually benefiting and how are those, outcomes informing future easement decisions or management decisions? Jeff, you might have a better answer to this as far as like this grant in particular, if monitoring is an aspect of it. I know there's, active monitoring going on in the area, but I didn't know if specifically this grant we're looking to monitor sites where management has happened.
I I would say that we had no formal plans, but the beauty of technology these days is the development of relatively low cost autonomous recording units for which we have several of those available. And for participants in this program, if they desire to have ARUs deployed on their lands, we actually within our program will mail them to landowners. We'll program them. All they have to do is take them out of the box and put them on a tree in their habitat footprint, and then they can send it back, and we can tell them what we detect on those. There are grander efforts underway to build a bigger, more robust private lands monitoring program as it relates to forest and shrubland enhancement restoration projects. So it's a work in progress, but yeah, we really want to know what's happening on the sites. We want to know just as much about the little trees that are growing on those sites too, because as Spencer said before, what's good for the woods is good for the warbler, is good for the herd. There's lots of things, and it all comes down to the habitat, to the creation of conditions that are going to have maximum benefits for these species that we desire to have. So we want to know if our outcomes of the actual practices are having the desired effect on the vegetation just as much.
I will also add to that to say, a lot of times when we're working on these grants, they're time bound. They're 2, 3, 4 year grants. And by the time that the project is done, the grant might be over. But that doesn't mean that the work that we're doing for species like golden winged warbler is done. And there's really just kind of projects that build on other projects. So, right now we're all working on this grant together. At Audubon, I have a separate grant where we're also doing golden winged warbler work. And part of that is monitoring different sites. And we're going back to sites that were monitored or that were managed in past grants that we know where that management's happened and we're a couple years in. So we often are building on past projects too. So I guess really what I'm saying is if it doesn't happen necessarily right tied in with this grant, it could be something that could be monitored as we continue doing this work because it won't be done next year or anything like that. It's an ongoing process for sure.
Yes.
And then Katie, you had a question. Is a quarter of an acre to half an acre too small of an area to apply management? So this is a great question because a lot of folks don't own a lot of land. They might be thinking about what can they do in their backyard. And I definitely like to say nothing is too small to do something. It all plays into the bigger thing. You might not be having quite the same impact as when we're managing a large parcel, but there's still things that you can do. You can still focus in on having species diversity, promoting native species as food sources, things like that. So there's a lot that you can still do, and it's still going to have an impact. So just because you don't own a lot of land doesn't mean that you should do nothing.
Yeah, I would add that 0.25 to zero point 0.5 acres of a quality shrubland is a terrific resource for many native pollinators. And I kind of fall into that category right there, Katie. And I these days during the winter, I am both befuddled and just I don't know frustrated a little bit. But I have feeders out back with like high priced seed, and then I'm looking over to my little patch of shrubland herbaceous stuff on the side of my yard, and I'm watching the juncos pull down the native vegetation and knocking seed off, and they're eating off the top of the snow, and like all of my black oil sunflower seeds and everything else is just sitting there. And I'm like, the possum comes in at night and eats it, I guess. But like it's just hilarious that just a little patch along the other side of my driveway is having immense benefits for wintertime birds, something that we should not discount at all.
And then, Steve, you had a question about monitoring. What role can drones play in monitoring? And you're asking specifically about bird monitoring.
Yeah, well,
Nice.
not as just the bird monitoring, but the vegetation and shrub monitoring. I'm going back to what Spencer is doing, where I think he has a I guess, a higher end drone. But are there drones that first time users might be able to use to, as part of their own self-education about what's happening with the land from year to year, from an overhead view versus boots on the ground monitoring cameras that way. And I do know that there are drone programs and infrared sensors that you can put onto the higher end drones that even can detect bird nests on the ground through infrared. But I think that's a little beyond my budget to incorporate that. And I asked this question because I've always wanted to have a drone, and I got to convince my wife this is why I should have a drone because Claire said it's okay.
Well, I'm certainly not the drone expert, so I'll let Spencer kind of talk about your experience with it. And then I have some loose information on stuff I've heard at conferences and things like that. But Spencer, you know way more than me.
I wouldn't say that, but we have used the drone to inform management and land conservation for probably the last 7 or 8 years. It was a drone that was maybe $600 or $700 at the time, and we have gotten so much use out of it. The imagery that you get from it with just 10 minutes, you will learn more in that 10 minutes than you might learn in 10 days out on the foot. This is an example here, the same slider that we had earlier. And these are just simple images. There's no special adapters or sensors or LiDAR or anything at play here. This is just the camera that this particular software uses, showing the before and after based on plant health metrics, based on the color of the vegetation. Obviously, there's a little bit of seasonality there, but you can really learn what sort of impact you're having just in that 3 month span. So yeah, the technology is evolving. It's becoming more affordable every day. There's all sorts of different functions that you can utilize with drone deploy and other like softwares that help inform and guide management. Going down to the species level, not necessarily the habitat level. I don't have the funds for that either, Steve, and hopefully that becomes within reach someday. But yeah, right now, essentially what we've been doing is purely based off of habitat, and we're able to fly, I'd say, a 150-acre swath within 20 minutes to a half an hour. It takes about a day to process the imagery, and then you have a very high resolution, almost real time ortho image where you can get down and measure down to the sub meter.
Spencer, in that process, are you pre-programming the drone to fly a certain area at a certain height, and then you're just more or less sitting back during that 20-minute process, and then it comes home back to you, the drone?
Exactly. Yep, it's all a pre-programmed flight pattern, and it zigzags over the property, taking downward images. Then you plug in the SD card, and it all uploads and stitches each one of those images together. It could be hundreds of images that it stitches together in the course of a few hours. So pretty incredible software, and it seasonality has a lot to do with it. If you want to see what's on the ground, flying in April is a great time before leaf out. After the snow is off, you can see a lot on the ground. If you want to see, mature canopy health, midsummer is a great time to fly. At the same point in time, you're dealing with elements every time you're out there. So you want to take into consideration wind, precipitation, how many batteries it might take to fly a particular course, and you can set your height and different variables to offset some of that. But yeah, it's been an incredibly handy tool. And if there's folks on the call still that are interested in having a quick drone flight of their property to help guide the management, if nothing ever comes of it other than you get a few pretty drone photos, that's enough for me.
Very cool. Yeah, the drones, it's pretty impressive what they're doing with that technology now. And I certainly don't know a lot about it, but they're starting to use it even in, commercial forestry where they're able to figure out diameters of trees and species composition and all sorts of stuff. So it's pretty impressive what's out there. And I assume that as time goes on, we're going to have a lot more access to that kind of stuff. Currently very cost prohibitive. I know we're at 8 o'clock now, which was technically the end of the call. It doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat. So I'll just give folks kind of one last chance to ask anything or make any comments. Otherwise, we'll probably hop off here.
Well, I just want to thank Claire and everybody else who's been involved in this whole process and in watching it from the back end. It's amazing the work that you and Jeff and others are doing. And here at Indian River Lakes Conservancy, we really appreciate your help and look forward to receiving help as we rehabilitate our golden wing warbler area, hopefully this coming fall. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I also just wanted to reiterate that, thank you, everyone. This has been a great group project to be a part of, and I've learned a lot. We are moving out of the area, but we are looking to hopefully buy a little bit of property, and it won't be in this specific area, but I've learned a lot of different resources that I can take away from this and apply to where we're moving to in northern Alabama. So this was extremely helpful, and I'm glad I got to be a part of the project.
Oh, thank you.
All right, it looks like we don't have any more questions, so we'll let everybody hop off. But big thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. Happy to have everybody, and hope to get some emails and chat with some of you about
Don't
more.
be afraid. Give us a shout. We're here to help.
Yeah.
Don't be complacent.
Y'all have a great night.
Good night,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thank you.
guys. Bye.